You made 3 decisions this morning before you even realized you were choosing. One was influenced by something you saw 2 days ago. Another by a word someone used in passing. The third by the absence of information you didn't know was missing. And none of it felt like influence at all. Most people believe they're in control of their thoughts. They think influence requires pressure, persuasion, or some obvious attempt to change their mind. But the most effective forms of influence don't feel like influence. They feel like insight, like preference, like your own conclusion. The truth is, your decisions are shaped constantly by patterns you don't notice, not through force, but through the way information is arranged, the way options are framed, the way silence is used just as deliberately as words. These patterns don't announce themselves. They simply guide you toward a predetermined outcome while allowing you to believe you arrived there on your own. This isn't about conspiracy. It's about psychology. And once you understand how these mechanisms operate, you'll start seeing them everywhere, in conversations, in marketing, in relationships, in the structure of the choices you're offered every single day. Pattern 1. Anchoring and frame control. The first number you hear becomes the reference point for everything that follows. If someone mentions a figure, a timeline, or a standard before you've formed your own assessment, your brain uses that as an anchor. Even if the number is arbitrary, it shapes your perception of what's reasonable. In a salary negotiation, the person who states a figure first controls the frame. If they say 60,000, you're now thinking in that range. If they say 90,000, your counteroffer adjusts upward automatically. The anchor doesn't have to be accurate, it just has to be first. This works because the human brain is comparative, not absolute. You don't evaluate worth in isolation. You evaluate it relative to the most recent information, and whoever provides that reference point controls how you measure value. Pattern 2. Reciprocity through microinvestment. When someone gives you something small, information, a favor, a compliment, your brain registers a social debt. This happens beneath conscious awareness. The gift doesn't need to be valuable. It just needs to feel intentional. A colleague shares an insight you didn't ask for. A stranger holds a door and makes brief eye contact. A friend offers advice before you've indicated you need it. In each case, a subtle imbalance is created. Your mind begins seeking equilibrium. You become more agreeable, more willing to return the gesture, more inclined to say yes to the next request. The mechanism is evolutionary. Reciprocity ensures survival in social groups. But in modern contexts, it's used strategically. The person who gives first controls the terms of exchange, and most people don't realize they're negotiating until they've already agreed. Pattern 3. Illusion of scarcity and urgency. When something appears limited, your brain shifts from evaluation mode to acquisition mode. The question is no longer whether you need it. The question becomes whether you'll lose the opportunity to have it. This operates on loss aversion, the psychological principle that people fear losing something more than they value gaining it. When a decision is framed as time-sensitive, when an option might disappear, when you're told only a few remain, your rational assessment weakens. You stop asking if it's right. You start asking if you'll regret not acting now. You see this in limited-time offers, in relationships where someone pulls away strategically, in job opportunities presented as closing windows. The scarcity doesn't have to be real. It only has to feel real. And once that urgency is activated, you make decisions faster, with less scrutiny, often against your own interest. Pattern 4. Consistency and identity leverage. People need to see themselves as consistent. Once you've stated a position, made a small commitment, or identified with a group, your brain begins filtering information to reinforce that identity. This is cognitive consistency, and it's one of the most predictable patterns in human behavior. If someone can get you to agree to something minor, they've established a direction. You've created a self-image, even if subtle. A person who recycles once is more likely to call themselves environmentally conscious. A person who donates $5 is more likely to identify as generous. And once that identity forms, future requests that align with it feel easier to accept. This is why influence often begins with questions, not statements. Do you consider yourself someone who values fairness? The question isn't neutral. It activates an identity. And once you've claimed it, saying no to the next request feels like self-contradiction. Your brain resists that discomfort, so it adjusts your behavior to match the identity you've already accepted. Pattern 5. Silence and information control. The most overlooked form of influence is what isn't said. Silence shapes perception just as powerfully as words, because your brain fills gaps with assumptions. When information is withheld, you construct explanations, and those explanations are often more favorable to the person withholding than the truth would be. In negotiations, the person who speaks less controls more. In relationships, the person who withdraws explanation forces the other to interpret, to guess, to accommodate uncertainty. In decision-making, the person who presents 3 options while quietly omitting a 4th has already narrowed your range of choice. This works because humans fear ambiguity. When something is unclear, your mind assigns meaning, rather than tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. And whoever controls what you don't know controls the narrative you build. Scenario 1. The reframed favor. You're in a meeting. A colleague asks if you can take on a small task, just for this week. You agree. The following week, they return with a similar request, slightly larger. You've already established yourself as helpful. Saying no now feels inconsistent with the identity you demonstrated. The second request wasn't harder to ask. It was easier to accept because you'd already committed to being the person who says yes. Scenario 2. The disappearing option. You're considering 2 job offers. One employer responds quickly, provides all the information you request, and gives you a clear timeline. The other is vague, slow to respond, and mentions they're interviewing other candidates. Your focus shifts to the second offer, not because it's better, but because it feels uncertain. Your brain prioritizes resolving the ambiguity over evaluating the substance. The absence of clarity became the influence. Scenario 3. The anchored compromise. A friend suggests meeting at 8. You prefer 6. They counter with 7. You agree, feeling like you've reached a mutual decision. But 8 was never their real preference. It was an anchor. By starting high, they ensured the compromise landed closer to what they wanted. You didn't lose the negotiation because you felt like you had input, but the frame was set before you ever responded. Recognition begins with pattern awareness. When someone provides information early in a conversation, ask yourself if that's an anchor. When you feel urgency, pause and assess whether the scarcity is real or constructed. When someone gives you something unsolicited, notice if a request follows. These mechanisms rely on speed and emotional response. Slowing down disrupts them. Protect yourself by verifying information independently. Don't let the first number, the first frame, or the first option define your range of thinking. Create your own reference points before engaging. Ask clarifying questions. Request the full picture, especially what isn't being emphasized. Emotional regulation is essential. Influence often works through discomfort, fear of missing out, fear of seeming inconsistent, fear of ambiguity. When you notice these feelings, pause. The discomfort is part of the mechanism. Your willingness to sit with it without immediately acting is your defense. Boundaries matter. You don't owe explanations for your decisions. You don't need to maintain consistency with statements made under pressure. You can change your mind. The need to appear consistent is a vulnerability these patterns exploit. Releasing that need removes the leverage. Influence doesn't require deception. It requires structure. It operates in the space between what you notice and what you assume. The moment you become aware of these patterns, they lose their invisibility. And invisibility is what makes them work. You won't eliminate influence from your life. It's embedded in every social exchange, every decision, every interaction. But you can change the terms. You can slow down. You can question the frame. You can notice when something feels urgent without knowing why. Awareness doesn't make you immune. It makes you deliberate. And that shift, from reactive to intentional, changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you stop moving through it unconsciously. You start choosing whether to follow it at all.